Welcome to Fontribute, where we talk about fonts and their attributes. Fontribute. So this week, thank you guys for coming. Really enjoyed to have you guys talking about fonts today on Fontribute. Today we're going to talk about what we consider what was called an old-style typeface. Two different typefaces that are interpretations of that genre, but taken in very unconventional ways. I think for me as a type designer, I think one of the things I enjoy the most about looking at other type designers' projects is when they take a convention and they really surprise you with something you didn't expect. When you first initially look at it, even as a professional type designer, you go, oh, okay, I see what they're doing, I see what they're getting at. But then in more detailed focus in an environment like Fontribute, where we're really looking at two different typefaces in a very nuanced way, there'll be things that surprise you, that you go, wow, I didn't really expect that direction. Once you kind of give this intentional focus on it, you can't unsee those adjustments that were made, but you acknowledge it as in, wow, I see what they were going with. Their decisions for this design. So we have two different typefaces to talk about. There's Dapifer from Darden Studio and Bely from Typetogether. We can get started. These are both considered old style, meaning they call from a model of Garamond, this one of the kind of original styles of typefaces that were made that we think about. You can think of Jensen, Garamond, but they take that model, and what I mean by models are certain proportions and rhythms and logics from that genre that these two designs take from. They take it from those two that traditional model, but then they deviate from it in really surprising ways. So what we can say in general is Dapifer was basically, Garamond was treated as a slap serif as a project, while Bely basically goes for, if a Garamond had basically fangs attached to it, if I had to put it another way, or more appropriately, if Latin serifs were attached to a Garamond. I think that's the way I would interpret it. Both these directions are very unexpected. They come from different historical eras, and along with that, different design decisions. And let's explore how those parts were explored in these two different typefaces. How these contradictions, not even contradictions, but at least different mixing of aesthetics and models were mixed together. I think in very fascinating, different and fascinating ways. So let's get started. With the Uppercase H, what we can see is, in Dapifer, it's a slap serif. It's a very, what you would expect, a slap serif H. If you had this in complete isolation, it would be a slap serif. You wouldn't really know that much that this was supposed to be from the Garamond model. The only thing that might tip you off is the width. The general proportional width of it might give you an instinct to tell you this might be an old style from that. While with Bely, we have Latin serifs on the top. I remember I've seen specimens of Bely, and I didn't even catch this, to be honest with you, at first. I was like, I felt there were certain attributes I noticed from it, but I couldn't pin it down. And in this, as I was hinting in the intro for this episode, there were design decisions that were very unexpected when I looked at it more closely. In this case, with Bely, it's these Latin serifs, these triangular Latin serifs on the top of this H. It's super surprising. It's not what you expect, and this contrasts it to the bottom serifs of this H. This is, while there is bracketing going on in these serifs, it's very minor. It'd be way closer to say these are basically slap serifs almost, with very, very, very subtle bracketing. But in general, the vocabulary difference between the top of the H and the lowercase H and Bely is dramatically different. And this is why I met Bar as a very big surprise, as a type designer looking at these typefaces. So I also want to point out, I brought up in different episodes, sometimes there's a logic in a typeface you're trying to convey, and there are certain times you'll purposely break your logic or introduce a new thing to the mix. And in this case, it's the top of the capitals in Bely are these Latin serif treatments, basically. Well, the bottoms have the slap serifs instead. And I think, and in general, what all this does, it creates this very sharp fang attack. It's like this fang episode going on in Bely that, while in Dapifer, kind of surprises about it come in other directions. Let me give you an example. So first off, with the Q, capital Q, I think this really clearly shows the difference in vibe between the two of them. Bely is a fang attack. Like that tail of that Q is just jutting out to a point. It's about as fanging as you can get. So it ties in while the general the momentum and curves of the roundness of the top of the Q in Bely, or they seem pretty traditional. They seem what you would expect to see in this kind of design. So it matches and pairs what's going on with the H. This kind of Jekyll and Hyde effect happening in the design. Daphner goes for, again, a more traditional model of the old style Garamond, where we have this very long swoopy tail that kind of arcs over. It's generally not nearly as aggressive in its design decision, and it's how it expresses its vocabulary. I think in the lowercase n is where we really see more coming together, the aesthetic differences and tonal differences between these two designs. So in Daphner, this is the part where it really starts to move from, instead of being an old style, into this slab serif model. So beyond the serifs themselves, if you look at how the joint moves to the shoulder, over to the stem and the N, it's treated in what we would call, in how a slab serif may be treated, meaning its contrast is what is called expansionist. Basically, the stroke starts thin and then gradually expands in weight, moving over in a pretty gradual manner. This speaks to a model of contrast that is, instead of being a broad nib, pointed pen, where we talk about in the type design calligraphy model world. This is clearly coming from a different source. It's how it's treated as much more like a slab serif in much you made 100 years later would make. The one hint about this oil cell sourcing in Daphner is how this flag terminal is handled on the top of Daphner. It's, instead of being a perfectly flat slab, it's tilted up, and then it has a little pinching going on in this inner corner right here. It gives this sense of a flag serif, but not particularly doing it, but more lean towards it's very surprising. It gives a certain toothiness to that stroke, to the area over there, that does not make it perfectly smooth and cleaned out, that the other design decisions in Daphner would do. Let's look at that next to Bely. Bely, it feels like basically the top quadrant of Bely basically says, I am sharp and I am a fang, and I'm just going to make things really abrupt. That's my decision across the board. So the flag serif in Bely is basically literally a Super Mario World flag. Basically, you can treat it you can think of it that way. It's a triangle that comes to a beak point, and how the joint moves to the shoulder in Bely is, this calls from a calligraphic source. It's inspired by that. It's calling from that. So you have this movement from the thin point to a rapid transition into the heaviest part of the shoulder, basically, of the N. It's calling from a calligraphic source, and it's thinking of how contrast moves from the thin part to the thick part. Contrast to Daphner, to see what I mean by this. See the differences between the two and how they're treated. I think another example to express what I'm talking about is in the lowercase c. I generally don't talk about the lowercase c in Fontribute so far, but I feel like in this project it makes a lot of sense to talk about the two. Daphner is really surprising because the way this aperture is handled and how that terminal is handled in Daphner is, it's not following what we would normally follow as a model for a Garamond old style. It's not a bowl terminal, this very cut off flat 90-degree treatment between the top terminal and the bottom terminal of Daphner C speaks to what we see in a slab serif, more of a slab serif, maybe something, even a sans serif, honestly. You would see this in the sans serif. Like, this could be like a high contrast sans serif in how it's being treated. And notice also the difference. It's a very broad stroke at the top of the C, but then there's tapered terminal on the bottom. So yet there's also this cueing of a little hint of an old style kind of calligraphic sourcing at the bottom stroke, but this kind of wide tapered cutoff treatment at the top. It makes for a very surprising texture and aesthetic in the typeface because of that. It's very surprising. I was very surprised when I first saw this project to see this treatment approach decided on for the C. Bely continues its model of top part, sharp, fang. You got this terminal on the top of the C that's very fanged out. And the bottom, it follows a more, again, calligraphic treatment. Notice how it's angled, how it ends, and its general narrowness. So also notice that. Notice how narrow that relatively is to this very wider, the wideness of this C, and how enclosing the Daphner C is versus the openness of the Bely C. In the S, we can see again, Bely is following this model, sharp fang terminals, and at the end of it, it is interesting to note that in this one, it was chosen that both the top and bottom terminal would be treated the same way. So I would posit that the designer decided that for this project, that having basically almost like a flat terminal on the bottom, that maybe didn't make sense. He broke with the rhythm for the project, and thus decided to keep it consistent across the both top and bottom terminal. Daphner chose to be a very interesting direction. So it's going 90-degree angles and how the terminal is being treated, but it didn't want to do the full kind of curvature on the outer stroke and abrupt cutting on the flat bottom. Notice there's these straight cutoffs on how the S is being handled in the terminals. It gives a hint that this is calling from it wants to hint towards the old style aesthetic, but kind of play in the middle. It's this interesting tension points between this old style direction and the slab style direction it's trying to go for. Notice the contrast in tone also. It just feels more. While there's a dissonance, it's interesting. They both have dissonance, but they do it in very different ways. Bely does this very sharp fang attack. Daphner's doing in this kind of unexpected moves that are giving this adding straight strokes and points as areas you would not expect. Okay, so based on this review, based on what we're talking about, here's a couple of things we can make an assessment about these projects. So generally overall, they're both old styles, and when you typeset it out, that's kind of the tone you'll be getting. So this would be an example. You would want to use a Garamond or an old style, but you want something a little different. You want to spice things up a little bit. And I think these two typefaces are actually great examples of approaching that, where there are these old style typefaces with really unexpected decisions being made. So, and even a well-known genre can surprise you. That's a big conclusion I want you to take away from this, is that these may be well-known genres, but a lot of small design decisions can have a large impact overall. So in general, both of these create I would feel, a very hissy, dissonant tone. Surprisingly, I mean, it's like enough to ping you, to catch your attention. It's kind of not maybe the uncanny valley would be a good way to talk about it, where it's what you would expect, but there's some surprises in it that go, oh, that's a little surprising. I didn't expect that. With Daphner, we had these unexpected flat terminals, this unexpected contrast in how some strokes are combined together. And all this combination of design decisions lead to an initial looking like, oh, this is a old style, but there's some things going on. It had a little hiss and dissonance to it. Bely, likewise, it's an old style. You would typeset it out, you would get that feeling, but they create a hissy effect. Bely, by the sharpness of its design, by its terminals and treatments and introductions in a lot of ways. Daphner in more of these unconventional, unexpected decisions. So if I had to make a metaphor to explain the difference between these two, or the subtle difference, I could almost feel like this is imagine that you're in a northeastern winter and it's really cold and bleak. Very beautiful, but cold and bleak. You enjoy it, but it's a little harshness about it because you're in the winter. It's the winter, and it's not exactly the best of times. You're bundled up. You're wearing multiple layers, but you still recognize the beauty of the events and what's happening here. If I made the difference between the two of them, Daphner is Bely is when you're outside. You're still outside and you feel the harshness of the wind blowing by, and it's a real biting cold that kind of bites at your nose and your skin that's exposed. Dampner is when you have come inside the house where it's warm, but you haven't gotten your clothes off yet, and you're wet, basically, from being outdoors in the winter. So there's a little discomfort from it, but you're happy to be indoors, and there's a certain warmth that comes from that. I would definitely close by saying these typefaces are, again, examples of unexpected design decisions in a well-known genre that I think are very, very rewarding and very welcoming in your design decisions. It takes a lot of maturity in how you would approach these and how you would use these, but I think the net rewards lead to, I think, more interesting projects. Sometimes dissonance and hiss is a good thing in a project. This is Thomas Jockin from Fontribute. I hope you've enjoyed yourself in this week's conversation. Love to hear your thoughts. How do you use typefaces? What do you see when looking at them? Let's have a great conversation. I hope you learned a lot from this discussion, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you. Take care.